Hi, thank you. Good morning. My name is Julian Leslie, Head of Networks and Chief Engineer here in Great Britain, working for the National Grid Electricity System Operator. I just want to take a few moments this morning just to talk through our plans that within 3 years from now, that we will have a few moments, a few hours of zero carbon operation on our electricity grid. Before I do that, I just want to explain sort of the situation here in GB and where the electricity system operator fits into the industry. So, like every nation, there are distribution networks that provide power to people's homes, that provide the network. We have suppliers which then contract to provide that energy into people's homes. On the other hand, you then have the transmission owners who own the 400,000 and 275,000 kV network, and the very large generators, both synchronous and non-synchronous, connect to that network. And we, as the electricity system operator, we sit in the middle. We don't own generation, we don't control the demand, and we don't own the transmission assets either. So we purely provide the system operation functionality that ties the whole network together. And therefore, it is our job as the network decarbonizes and the generation connecting to the network decarbonizes to ensure that we have the tools and the ancillary services in place such that we can continue to operate a safe and secure network. So what does that mean in terms of our role then? So for the ESO in Great Britain, we operate and balance the system. So we have access to the balancing mechanism, and we balance the last 1 to 2% of the energy in the market, because the market then solves the other imbalance to where so the residual balancer in the last few moments that keep the frequency at 50 hertz here in GB. One of our key activities is to widen access to that market to as many people and as many devices as possible. So we've just recently opened up the market to everything over 1 megawatt, whereas previously it was generally 100 megawatts or higher. Now it's down to 1 megawatt. And through that, we promote competition in all of our ancillary services, in the products that we buy, the services we procure. They're all done through competitive processes, and that brings in obviously competition to drive down price, but it also promotes innovation and new technologies to provide those services. As a system operator, we work with the transmission owners across Great Britain, and we make network recommendations for the investment. We do this on an annual basis, and the last programme that we ran, looking out to 2035, recommended nearly £16 billion worth of network reinforcement in GB. And that network is needed in order to connect the zero carbon generation, which for GB is predominantly very large offshore wind. And for example, we now have a commitment in Britain that by 2030, we will increase from the 10 gigawatts of offshore wind we have today to 40 gigawatts of offshore wind within the next 8 years. As we integrate this large amount of renewable generation, the operational planning is much more crucial. Understanding how the network is going to operate, how we maintain the stability, the inertia, the frequency response, but also at the same time granting access so that people can work on the system whilst minimizing the constraints and congestion. As a system operator, we also facilitate the connection agreements with all of the new connectees to the system. So we work with the transmission owners and the connecting generator to ensure that they have the right network for them to connect to. And then finally, as a system operator, we look after all of the Great Britain charging and billing for the transmission use of system charges and also for balancing system charges. So that's who we are and what we do. To give you a sense of scale, our peak demand is about 50 gigawatts. So we're a 50 gigawatt system. We are winter peaking when it's cold and dark here in Britain. But on a day like today, our peak demand today is probably going to be around 35 gigawatts. On the next slide then, we'll get into the meat of why I'm here today. And in 2019, we set out an ambition that by 2025, that we will have the ability to operate a zero carbon network. So this means that when the market can deliver us a zero carbon solutions, that includes nuclear, interconnectors, the small amount of hydro plant that we've got, and obviously solar and wind generation. When the market has said there's enough of that available, it meets the demand of the network, that we will be able to have had the tools and systems and ancillary services in place such that we do not need to interfere in that market in order to buy on those ancillary services such as inertia. The key challenges that need to be overcome in this is absolutely just that point. As you're removing all of the inertia from the system, so you have no synchronous machines other than 2 or 3 nuclear units and possibly a few hydro plants, then managing the inertia and the frequency and the associated voltage control is the biggest challenge that we face. But we're confident we can do this. Already you can see on the slide the records that we've had recently. So 88% of zero carbon generation just over a year ago. And we've had an instantaneous 60% share of wind, again, sort of just a year ago. And what we do know is on May 23rd last year, the market did deliver 100% zero carbon generation. However, by the time that we had to constrain off the wind, to buy on the gas plant, to provide the inertia, voltage control and frequency response, then the actual outturn for that day was only 84% of zero carbon generation. But what it really means is we know exactly why we bought that 14% of synchronous gas-fired power plant. So in order to deliver on our ambition by 2025, what we're trying to do now, or what we are doing now, is finding alternative ways in order to provide those services such that when the market then delivers us that 100% zero carbon outcome in 2025, that we have the products and the services on the system such that we don't have to buy the gas-fired power plant. So how are we doing this? So we're doing very much a learning by doing approach. So we are running something called pathfinders. And they're called pathfinders because we don't know all the answers when we set out. We don't know which bits of the code and the framework or the markets are needed to change. And because they're pathfinders, we have the regulatory approval to sort of work flexibly, to think about what we need and how we might implement it. So we've launched several pathfinders now. The key and the biggest one has been around stability. So in January 2019, we signed the first contracts to provide stability services. And they had to be online within 18 months of last January. So already we have seen a hydro plant, pumped hydro storage plant providing stability where they will just spin a machine in air or in water. We have seen the repurposing of CCGT, a retired CCGT plant, which has now been repurposed. And it is now spinning in synchronicity with the network, but is acting, but is not a generator. It's taking power from the network to spin and maintain synchronous. And that allows us, therefore, to repurpose this plant and to provide a real cheap service to the system, providing the same inertia as if the plant was a gas-fired power plant. And thirdly, what it's done, it's also allowed one of our customers to engage with GE, which is a large machine manufacturer, to design something just specifically for inertia. So it's a very small, compact machine, but it is very, very heavy. And once that's rotating in synchronicity with the grid, this small machine provides the same inertia as a large gas-fired power plant. So the beauty about the pathfinders, what we're finding is that yes, it allows us to operate the system with even greater penetrations of renewable at lower carbon intensity. But also what it's doing, it's saving costs for the consumers because we're not having to constrain off the wind to create the space to constrain on the gas. We just let the market sit there and do what it needs to do. And then we have these 0 megawatt solutions providing the inertia and the grid stability services that we need. And we've taken this approach to manage voltage, where we're going to market. As you're probably aware, voltage is much more of a smaller regional issue. But again, engaging with the market, understanding the range of solutions, getting the innovation and the new technology providers to come forward, we are finding that it's a very low-cost way, an effective way to manage the network. With frequency management, we are working within the current sort of constraints and frameworks that we have. But what we've done is we introduced a new fast frequency response service last October, something called dynamic containment. And to be enabled to participate in dynamic containment, you need to deliver your full output within a second. So there's some deadband settings around the frequency, which for us here in GB is a 50 Hertz system. And once a frequency falls below or rises above a certain frequency level, then the dynamic containment devices, which are predominantly batteries, they need to give their full output within a second. Now, having that really, really fast frequency response allows you to run a system with less and less inertia. So it's always that fine balance between how much inertia do you need and do you have versus how much and how fast your frequency containment needs to be. So we are exploring further to see whether we can provide a service that can deliver frequency containment within half a second. Because again, if we can do that, then that'll reduce the need for inertia. What we've also found is that those generation that's on the distribution network that doesn't necessarily play in the big sort of markets, that actually there's a huge amount of flexibility there. So last year, with the COVID impacts and the reduced demand, we introduced the ODFM market, which is the optional downward flexibility market. So this allowed us, with a few hours' notice, to constrain off embedded wind or solar generation. And we paid them for that, but this was the first time that these participants were playing in an active market. And there was around 4,000 megawatts of these devices that wanted to play in this market. And as we went through the COVID period with the low demands, it became a key success story that allowed us to safely and cost effectively manage a network through COVID. As we look into the future, we are looking at an ODFM type service and expanding that out across the whole system. The other thing we've done, again, to work with inertia and frequency response, is to look at the rate of change of frequency. And we used to operate the system to a rate of change of frequency of no greater than 0.125 Hertz per second. But we decided some years ago that actually a rate of change of frequency of 1 Hertz per second was where we needed to get to. But we had 50,000 sites of embedded generation that had rock-off settings that weren't appropriate for the new, faster rate of change of frequency. So we embarked on a program of changing the frequencies, the rock-off settings on all of this distributed generation. So to date, we're sort of nearly 70% of our way through in terms of megawatt volume. And as of today is a key milestone in British system operation history, is that we are allowing from today a rate of change of frequency of up to 1 Hertz per second, which is a big step change from 0.125 Hertz per second. So today is a landmark day. And what this allows us to do, it allows us to run the system with less inertia. And that, combined with a very fast frequency response, has given us the confidence that actually we can cope with and manage a rate of change of frequency at a much faster state. And then finally on this slide, system restoration. Although in order to operate the grid in 2025 at zero carbon, system restoration, or hopefully we won't be using that. But we are looking at different ways to restore the system. So using the distributed energy sources, using the distributed wind and solar, maybe combined with a battery and grid forming inverters, to actually, if the worst were to happen, to restart the system from the bottom up. At the same time, working with transmission connected wind farms and interconnectors to see how they can also provide system restoration services. Because obviously, as your gas and your coal-fired power plants close, where you historically get these resources from are going to be no longer available. And here in GB, this whole program of zero carbon operation by 2025, in my mind, is a big risk management program. We have a very ambitious government here in GB. We were the first nation in the world to sign up to a legally binding net zero target by 2050. And that's for the whole energy system, not just electricity. And just this week, our Prime Minister has just announced that we will have a net zero electricity system by 2035. But we also already knew that we had a government with an ambition of 40 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030. So the zero carbon operation by 2025, to me, is managing the risk, because the market is going to change. The government policy, the government subsidies, the government intervention and direction of travel is really pushing the network to decarbonize at a very, very rapid pace. And as a system operator, we need to adapt to that, because what we don't want to be as a system operator is the entity in the whole industry that is the one saying, you can't decarbonize this quickly. We can't accept this amount of wind and renewables onto the system. So this program of work, the zero carbon operation by 2025, allows us to be an enabler and to say to government, yes, this ambition that you have is fantastic. And as a system operator, we will adapt and we can bring on this huge amount of renewable generation, and we'll still be able to operate a safe and secure network. And by getting on the front foot and by delivering this in 2025, it means that if any of our services and products don't quite do what we want them to do, we still have access to the gas-fired power stations. However, if we waited to 2035, which is when we need to have this fully working, fully zero carbon, 365 days of the year, the gas plants will be closed by then. So actually, by doing this now, by getting the plans in place, by demonstrating in 2025 that we can operate the system here in Britain at zero carbon, gives us that confidence and gives us that ability that if we've got it wrong, if something changes, that actually we can fall back on the conventional power plant. We don't intend to do that, but we've got that insurance policy in place. Then as we go beyond 2025 out to 2035, then it's a continual refinement, probably buying more of these products, enhancing the tools in the control room and the analysis tools that we have to monitor the system. But that will allow us then to transition from a few hours of zero carbon operation in 2025 to fully 365 days a year, 24/7 operation by 2035. So just to summarize then, so here in GB, the rapid decarbonisation of electricity supply is going to happen anyway. And therefore, we need to adapt to change the way and the need to operate the system. The system operator, the ESO, we are world leading with our ambition to be able to do this by 2025. I do work with other fast decarbonising networks such as Australia, California, Ireland, ERCOT and EnergyNet. And we're sharing our knowledge and our experience to do something called the GPST, the Global Power System Transformation Consortium, as well as Go15, which is the largest 18 transmission system operators in the world. Through our approach by using markets and because of the ESO system operator, we are putting out the need of the system, the technical need and requirement, and not predetermining the solution. What that is doing is bringing in new players, it's bringing in new sources of money, but it's also driving innovation and technology changes. And this is all coming together to continue one of the fastest decarbonising networks in the world. We are 60% less carbon intensive today than we were 7 years ago. So we've made a massive transformation here in GB, and that gives us the confidence that as we go forward, we can continue this decarbonisation journey And at the same time, through our approach in using markets to drive down costs and drive innovation, we can also reduce costs to the consumer. So that was all I wanted to say. So thank you very much for listening this morning.
Thank you. Thank you, Julian, Wesley. Thank you for your presentation. You take your time out of your busy schedule. Really appreciate. Zero carbon system operation by 2050. You mentioned about the management of system, and we can do it. And you also shared your opinion about the plan. Thank you. And Wesley, you are not able to attend the panel discussion today. So I have a question we received from online audience. If you are okay, then I will read. Recently in the UK, the efficiency of wind power generation reduced, and it is experiencing difficulties in an LNG supply, and it would lead to a large amount of increase in the bills of electricity. So with more renewables, we have to respond to the variables of renewables. So the UK has any measures to stabilize the power generation and power supply in responding to the variables of renewables? Do the UK has
Great
any
question.
measures?
Sure, great question. Thank you. So part of the price increase in price in the UK at the moment is driven by the international sort of gas market. So as we produce more renewables in the UK, then obviously our reliance on overseas gas reduces because we'll be able to produce our own generation. However, we have had a summer where there's been very little wind here in GB for quite a prolonged period of time. So therefore, working with our government, we are looking at long duration storage also. Now, whether that will be hydrogen electrolyzers or whether it's compressed air in caverns under the North Sea, or whatever it needs to be, but we absolutely need some long duration storage that can last for days, maybe even weeks, to provide the nation's power. So it is part of ours and government's plan to understand that energy mix as we go forward, so we don't get the shock to the energy price that we have experiencing at the moment.